welcome back! It is so good to be back! Okay, look, no one notices absences, but I was actually away for 2 weeks. 1 week, I was hosting Daniel Green's fantasy news episodes. That was the coolest thing. And the other week, I was down in Sydney, Australia, hosting some author interviews and panel discussions, making new friends who will appear on this channel in the coming months. But I'm back now. We're gonna continue our theme of looking at books written by other YouTubers. And yes, this is to celebrate the release of my own books, the Immortal Investigations. They've just finished their Kickstarter campaign. Yes! Thank you everyone who backed it, and I'm so excited for you to read those books in just a few weeks' time. But I'll shut up about all my stuff. Let's actually talk about the topic of the day. We are discussing the Debt Collection series by Andrew Givler. 4 books, starting with Soul Fraud. Some quick facts: this is an urban fantasy series. It's very similar in style and vibes to the Dresden Files. It's incredibly lighthearted, action-heavy, and just a lot of fun. Also, I'd consider this series to be almost G-rated. It does not rely on sex or violence or edgy darkness to be entertaining. And yet, this is still a pretty adult series in terms of complexity. It has intricate mystery plots that are very well executed, and they have big twists at the end. There's some very well thought out world building around secret immortals and secret magics, and there's just excellent comedy too. One last note before we begin: the author Andrew Givler does have a booktube channel with about 5,000 subscribers, but he also has a gaming channel where he goes by the name Sigils, which has a massive 1.39 million subscribers. I actually found his booktube channel first, so you should have seen my jaw drop. But I just love this. I love seeing people who are talented in multiple fields, because human beings have multiple talents. Anyway, the Sigils channel does heaps of family-friendly content. So he mostly plays Minecraft, Among Us, and even Fortnite. You know, games that are intended for a much younger audience. So there's zero swearing or crude content on his channel, and that's part of the appeal. And I think he keeps that theme going in his books, you know, keeping it pretty clean and family-friendly. And I respect that. I may myself prefer a bit of grimdark and horror, but I also legitimately consider myself a fan of this series. It's okay to like both of those extremes, but that's enough introduction already. Let's get into these books. Let's see if they're going to be right for you. Matthew Carver just wants to be left alone on his birthday. You see, on his birthday last year, his mum and 2 sisters were driving across town to surprise him when they were all in a car accident and died. So this year, on the anniversary, he just wants peace and quiet. But everything changed when a demon appears before him. Except Dan the Demon is not exactly the most intimidating of infernal residents. Still, Dan promises to make all of Matthew's dreams come true for the next 10 years, until, of course, his soul is reaped for hell.
Should have seen that coming.
Naturally, Matthew says no. However, Dan the Demon is very far behind on his sales quota, being not a very good salesman. So in desperation, he forges Matthew's signature on the soul contract. He commits soul fraud. Now Matthew's life has turned upside down. Yes, for the better, but he knows it's at a cost. He knows time is running out until his soul is sent to hell. He has to dive into a world of magic and immortals and ancient mysteries to find some way to survive and get his soul back. The problem is, hell doesn't want him to succeed. The act of committing soul fraud is like violating international law between great cosmic powers. Hell will do anything to stop Matthew from exposing their crime. Matthew must find allies willing to challenge the Dark Prince himself if he is to escape with his soul intact. So Matthew enters this fantasy world, and he finds all sorts of weird, wonderful, and worrisome things in there. Now I'm going to keep this segment quite vague, because half the fun of this series is just exploring this world. But one thing I really want to share, because I think it will entice you to read it, is the concept of magical nations. Obviously we encounter the nation of hell early on, and we assume heaven must be a thing, but there are in fact a lot of interested parties in this situation, and they all exist in this delicate balance, tenuous equilibrium, and Matthew Carver's unique situation could be just the thing that sends it all crashing down. This world is like the United Nations, except unlike the United Nations, these guys actually take direct action when international law is violated. Anyway, these nations are so cleverly laid out in the world. It's amazing how the series starts with only a few glimpses behind the curtain, but it just gets deeper and deeper as we go along. The small world ends up being so significant. One thing I'll address here, now the world building does include heaven and hell, and when I saw this in chapter 1, I immediately started wondering, is this going to be a Christian series? Is it going to promote Christianity? And honestly, no, absolutely not. These are not religious books, and I was on the lookout for that the whole time. I may have even been a little hyper-vigilant about it, but no, heaven and hell is just the world building stylistic choice. It's just the setting. Now, I don't want to spoil what these magical nations are exactly, but I do want to hint that this world building draws on a lot of different mythologies. This is what makes it such a rich experience to read. Even though it's a lighthearted and kid-friendly and fun, clean series, there is still cleverness in the world in how it extracts so many ideas from so many different sources and blends them all together.
Attention all! Fairy tale things!
That's why I'm really keen to keep reading this series as more books come out, because each one is adding so much to the lore. Regarding the story itself, there's something I want to make clear. These 4 books did not make me cry, or feel strong emotion, or change my life or my worldview, but they did entertain me from start to finish.
Are you not entertained?
So that's important to know going in. This is such a lighthearted series. There's not really any big themes or serious topics. It's a fun adventure. So this story is just great for escaping reality for a bit. I recently heard a concept that every story is either a window, a mirror, or a door. With the window, sometimes you glimpse ideas from far away, or a mirror will show yourself or your world reflected back to you. Or you can use the door and just step into another world entirely. Well, Debt Collection is very much a door-type story. It's about escapism. But the story itself is based on mysteries, and the mystery is always who is pulling the strings. You see, Matthew Carver is just a regular old vanilla mortal. He's no one special, and this is a great way to distinguish itself from the Dresden Files, which has such a huge presence in the urban fantasy genre. It sort of looms over every other work. And Harry Dresden, he's a wizard. He's not all powerful, but he's firmly in the middle of this power structure, if not upper middle. Meanwhile, Matthew Carver is at the very bottom of the power structure. He is outclassed in every way. This means that much of the mystery is focused on which super powerful immortal demigod figure is behind the events and manipulating mortal Matthew all along. And these plot twists really work. Each one landed hard. There was proper foreshadowing, there were clues, and the reveal just fit so nicely and flipped the whole plot on its head. This was honestly my favorite part of reading the series, just how tightly executed the reveals were. Now, the big goal of the plot is Matthew trying to get his soul back, and to do that he needs allies. So many of the smaller plot lines in the individual books are about him trying to ingratiate himself with various supernatural entities. Or at least, try not to add to his list of supernatural enemies. So we have adventure quests or court intrigue and scheming, and I love this. We explore these magical nations as we're journeying through the plot of trying to ally with them. So each plotline is perfectly paired with the world building in equal measure, and it's such a great balance. One final note on plot, these books are very episodic, okay? So each one will introduce a plot and resolve it by the end of that book. But there are links between the whole wider series, and again, it's a very similar formula to the Dresden Files. Self-contained stories with a few overarching plot lines intended to reward returning readers. So this series is written in first-person mode by Matthew Carver himself. He's a great protagonist with a truly unique voice. He's just the right amount of scared and cynical. His humor is very dry and sarcastic all the way through, and honestly, it's a great voice for storytelling, and it just about sells the whole thing. As for the character himself, well, Matthew goofs around a lot to avoid his true emotions. It's very relatable. for me. Yet despite his apparent goofiness, he has an iron will when he needs it. When he gets an idea in his head, he does not let it go. It's a nice layer of complexity and contradiction to his personality that makes him feel very real. And he doesn't have the darkness of Harry Dresden, so again, it's successfully unique. That said, there is one slight, problem here. Most of the other characters who are not Matthew are not particularly deep. They're not shallow one-dimensional characters, but they're not three-dimensional deep characters. They're very much two-dimensional, kind of in the middle there. You see, in this magical fantasy world, most of the characters are defined by what their class and abilities are. It's like Dungeons and Dragons. You have your hunter, your queen, your ranger, characters who are defined by their type. Now this means that they're all unique in the story. They never blurred together and they were always interesting, but there's not a lot of deeper character work in terms of their personalities. This is often something we see in light-hearted stories, just very straightforward characters, because when we're having fun, we're not really exploring the heights and depths of the human experience. It's not weddings and funerals, it's just regular emotions. So my point is that this is not exactly a sign of bad writing, okay? It's a style choice to keep it fun and lighthearted. The story just isn't about heavy stuff. So it's up to you as to whether or not that's a big deal. Although, to be clear, the series is not without its faults. This story suffers a bit from main character syndrome, or as I like to call it, the Bella Swan effect. If you've ever read or watched Twilight, you know everyone is just obsessed with Bella Swan. The moment she comes to school, she's the most popular kid. Everyone just gravitates to her everywhere she goes. And the next thing you know, people are just devoting their entire lives to either killing her or protecting her. They love her or hate her to such extreme levels. Why? Well, because she's the main character. And for pretty much no other reason. Well, Matthew Carver is a lot like that. Everyone in this supernatural world is just fascinated with him even though he's no one special. Every deity seems to want to invite him over to dinner. Now, technically, there is a reason for it. The whole soul fraud situation is a pretty big deal. And there are things that Matthew does, over the course of this series that impresses people. So that is meant to be why everyone's so obsessed with him. But even so, there were times it kind of just took me out of the story because it felt a bit unrealistic. This is a fun series, but is it a funny series? No, but a lot of the times, yes. So it's not a comedy series. It's not like Discworld or a regular sitcom, which will always have a joke every few seconds. This is an urban fantasy series. It is very focused on the plot. But when it wants to be funny, it absolutely nails it. There were plenty of times I laughed out loud while reading this series, and that's because Andrew Givler is genuinely just a really funny guy. Most of his YouTube work is about including comedy in gaming and in his videos. He's got a lot of skill here, so game recognize game. I don't know if I can get away with saying that, so I won't spoil any of the jokes in the books because I hate movies where all the good jokes are in the trailer, but let me just give you one specific example. Matthew has his soul stolen by fraud, so he asks one of his friends, hey, can we take legal action against Hell? Can we sue Hell? And his friend goes, I don't think that's such a good idea. Where do you think most lawyers end up? It's a fantastic joke, and the joke really lands, even in book form, where the jokes are just words on the page. That's the mark of a good comedy writer, that the joke works on its own, even without timing or tone of voice. So when there needs to be comedy, it delivers hard. I can't talk about this series without addressing Book 4 on its own. Death Tax, it really is an enigma. Now, first of all, this only came out in late September. This is a recent release, and I'm finally covering recent content. I'm a current trending YouTuber.
Welcome to downtown Coolsville.
But Book 4 is also an escalation for the series in literally every sense. First of all, it's a step up in quality. Now, I don't really like rating books by numbers because I think it's reductive, but just for the sake of example, I would rate book 1 as a 4-star book. So good solid 4 stars. 2 and 3 are 4.5 stars. But book 4 achieves greatness and lands that masterful 5th star. Also, the first 3 books are very urban fantasy, so set in the real world in LA and with magic woven in, but Death Tax goes full tilt into the fantasy side of things, and we are talking big concepts and epic magics. And finally, Death Tax becomes much more serious in tone, but to great effect. While the first 3 don't really tackle heavy themes as we talked about, Book 4 tackles death itself. It explores themes of mortality, the unfairness of death, the unpredictability of when it will come, and yet the inevitability of it too. Seriously, this book blew me away. I am so keen for more debt collection. Also, have you noticed the theme yet with the titles? Fraud, audit, summit, tax. It's all accounting terms. Debt collection. I'm sure you noticed. Now, how does this series handle representation? Honestly, really weirdly. I haven't seen something quite like it, because there's no representation, and I'm not sure what to make of it. So this series just doesn't talk about race, because our character, Matthew Carver, is mostly our only human character. Everyone else is supernatural, so it's more about what magical nation they come from, rather than what race they are. That said, I honestly don't recall if there were any descriptions about different skin colors, though I may have missed it. If you've read this, please let me know if you remember a mention of it. Also, yes, there is a strong presence of women in these books, that is quite well done, but there is 0 LGBT people at any point, not even a hint of them. Now, I never want to speculate on what a person's intentions were, or I don't want to put words in people's mouths, but from this lack of representation, I get the impression that Andrew was just trying to make his books as inoffensive as possible, sort of apolitical. That's why there's no talk of prejudice or social injustice, or any presence of minorities. Now, for the record, there is 0 problematic representation, there's no harmful stereotypes, but there is a noted absence. And I think that an absence can kind of be its own problem. I think if you don't represent anyone, the world can end up being a little bit whitewashed, you know, where everyone is white, straight, and normal. And that's not really reality either. I don't know what the answer is here, and I'm not going to moralize on it, because this is not a black or white issue, pun intended. This is a gray area. Our understanding of what makes good representation is constantly evolving, and we're learning new things as we go, so therefore I leave this one up to you to decide what you're comfortable with. So there's hardly any content warning to worry about here. Maybe some of the fantasy monsters are a wee bit scary, maybe some of the action violence is a bit too violent, you know, sometimes people get shot. There is one scene in the first book where a nameless henchman gets set on fire and dies, but believe it or not, it's actually not that graphic. The passage where that happens actually focuses on Matthew's reaction to that scene rather than the scene itself. So overall, this series is pretty suitable even for young kids. It's more kid-friendly than Skullduggery Pleasant, I can tell you that much. Is the ending worth it? Well, book 4 is easily my favorite, hands down. It's a fantastic novel. So we don't have any information on how many books there are going to be in this series all up. There's no end in sight, but Death Tax proves that it is going strong. I can confirm that much at least. And how much should you try? Well, you can try just book 1, Soul Fraud, and you'll know if the series is right for you. Now, I know earlier I gave the first book a lower star rating than the other books in the series, but honestly, the series ends up being exactly what you were promised in book 1. So it's a great starting point. Just know that the world gets bigger and the writing gets better as we go along. Well, that's all. I hope you now know if the series is going to be right for you, so good luck my friends and happy reading. Thanks for watching. I really do love and appreciate you guys. I love that I get to talk about books so much and people actually care to listen. It's the best thing. Now, I've got one more book review left to finish off our theme of YouTubers. That is Philip Chase and the Edan trilogy, and it is just the opposite of Debt Collection. It's heavy fantasy, hard world building, very serious plots, and it's ambitious with a capital A. I am very keen to discuss that one. Now, if you want to support what I do have a shop and I do have a Patreon, both help, and you can still pledge to my Kickstarter for a couple more weeks and pre-order your copies of my books, The Immortal Investigations, which also is an urban fantasy series like this one. You can also watch my review of those books if you want to know more. So that's it from me. Thank you for watching, I'll see you next time, and I hope you enjoy a good book today. Bye!